Good evening, everyone. I wanted to have a quick chat about the game engine Unity today and the recent, shall we say, mess they've gotten themselves into. If you're unaware, Unity as a company have merged with IronSource. Now, IronSource are essentially a company that builds products for game monetization, so they make software that helps game developers run ads on mobile platforms and stuff like that. Prior to that, however, IronSource was mainly known for a piece of software called Install Core, which is a software bundler, or at least that's how they describe it. That's a charitable description of it. It was essentially a way for software developers to bundle malware with their products. So that's stuff like browser toolbars, Bonsai Buddy, and every other piece of shit in that category, right? So, in fairness, Install Core is now technically discontinued, but fool me once, shame on you, etc, etc. These days, they're mostly all about running ads on mobile games, which I'd argue is only marginally better. So, as many people have already pointed out, this is a prime example of why open source is better, and why you should have been using the Godot engine. But as someone who is not an open source zealot particularly, I thought I'd elaborate on why, in this case at least, open source would have been preferable compared to other specific cases, and hopefully help you make better choices in the future. So, what makes proprietary software a particularly poor choice for a game engine is that it's foundational to your product, right? It makes you very vulnerable to vendor lock-in. Unity isn't a drop-in library or an asset, it's the underlying framework for your software. So, I run the technical capacity of a couple of SaaS products, and we use some proprietary software extensively. But it's always employed with a particular condition. If it cannot meet this condition, then it must be open source, right? And that condition is that it must be able to be integrated via a generic service layer with zero domain impact. So, for instance, a sales tool of mine called VideoWorks uses an external proprietary video processing and hosting service called Mux. But the integration with our product is done via a very narrow service layer where any other service could be integrated in its place. This is known as loose coupling. The domain itself knows nothing about Mux, and you could work entirely within that section of the code without knowing anything about them. In the future, it's likely we'll replace this with an in-house solution using FFmpeg or something, but right now Mux gives us what we need, and it can be easily swapped out later, right? It's a good use of external systems. This would be incredibly difficult to do with Unity. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's kind of impossible. Another way that open source is great in general for your software is that it somewhat insulates you from the vendor, right? So, for instance, recently, it was about a year ago, I think, Audacity made some management changes and they started collecting usage metrics. This was very unpopular in the FOSS community, and a new fork without those restrictions was released within literally hours. I think you could get one without that, because it was forked by someone else, because it was open source and that was an option. I'm fairly confident if it turned out that one of our open source vendors was grinding up kittens for their infrastructure or something, we'd have a new kittenless fork up essentially immediately, and it would not be an operational issue for our org, right? Having said that, so when is it okay to use proprietary software? Basically, when the operational costs for setup are about the same as the switching cost. So, for instance, we use Microsoft Teams and Office 365 extensively throughout our org. But if Microsoft suddenly required that all users give Bill Gates a back rub, we could switch to something different in a couple of days. No big deal, no risk to our organization, but we get the benefits of it being proprietary. You know, it's set up for us, the setup costs are low, the running costs are low, we get a lot of benefit out of that without exposing ourselves to the risk of that. I also think it's okay to use proprietary tools when they are specific domain tools, so especially creative tools. So And the reason for that is just that they tend to be better, right? The cycle time of software like that tends to be measured in months to years, so using the Adobe suite in your design team is probably not a concern. You know, it's unlikely you'll never ever have to move to something different. You could just stay on an older version if you wanted to, whatever. It's not that much of a big deal. It's not operationally complex, and the advantages to quality and the ease of hiring and stuff more than make up for its proprietariness. Thank you for joining me for a bit of a rambly video. If you enjoyed, please remember to hit the like button and subscribe if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you next time.